Welcome to Convention of States, a project of Citizens for Self-Governance. While we tend to focus on the more popular suggested amendments, such as a balanced budget or term limits, this presentation will address two areas of lesser discussed, but as important, suggested constitutional corrections. Constitutional abuses. One of the central problems with the American government is the belief that the purpose of government is to provide for our needs. Washington, D.C. has gradually amassed overwhelming power that is clearly outside the boundaries the framers intended when they wrote the Constitution. Actually, the Constitution, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, is in fact the problem, because they were not written tightly enough to fully represent the drafter's intentions. The two most abused provisions of the Constitution are the Commerce Clause and General Welfare Clause. Early on, even Thomas Jefferson commented on abuses of the two clauses in a letter from 1825. Congress is twisting the intent of federal law regarding interstate commerce to regulate all economic activity and to subsidize one group at the expense of another, and to expand the notion of promoting the general welfare to allow corrupt politicians to engage in costly internal improvements. There are two specific powers of Congress that are responsible for the vast amount of spending and regulation. First, the Commerce Clause. This is the source for most federal regulation of business, agriculture, mining, and yes, even medical care. Now, we won't discuss the Affordable Care Act as part of medical care, but we know it was first proposed under the Commerce Clause and eventually approved under the General Welfare Clause. The second source, of course, is the General Welfare Clause. This is the source for virtually all entitlement spending and mandates, such as Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and education. And we know education being the primary vehicle for government mandates. If both clauses were correctly applied, we would have no national debt, far lower taxes, a tiny fraction of the present rates, and anorexic federal spending compared to present levels. For this presentation, we will focus on a couple major cases during the FDR New Deal era and see how the Supreme Court set the stage for abuses of both clauses. It is important to realize and take note of the role the Supreme Court has played. Let's first look at the Commerce Clause in the Constitution, which is Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. Literally stated, it says, to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. The stage was set with the passing of the National Industrial Recovery Act of 1933, which regulated agriculture to include the chicken industry and was one of the main components of FDR's New Deal. The act provided two provisions that applied here. First, the code that governed processing of chickens, and next, the minimum wage and hour regulations for chicken processing employees. One key case occurred in 1935. Schechter Poultry was a processor of chickens and was accused of selling unhealthy chickens mixed in with healthy chickens. This case was also known as the sick chicken case. The government claims under the National Industrial Recovery Act were that Schecter's sold sick chickens amongst the healthy chickens, and the maximum work hours of Schechter employees was being violated, and also the rights of Schechter employees to unionize were denied. Well, the court got part of it right and part of it wrong. The court ruled correctly that the National Industrial Recovery Act was unconstitutional, and that Congress can only regulate the shipment of goods. In other words, interstate commerce begins at the departure point and ends at the destination. Where the court went wrong, however, was that they ruled Congress can regulate wage and hour matters, and also that Congress can regulate what, and I quote, directly affects interstate commerce. The usage of the term directly affects opened Pandora's box. Well, with the directly affects door opened in Schechter, the changing of justices over time and what was once considered unconstitutional, now constitutional, Congress can and does regulate everything having to do with interstate commerce over all aspects of our life. Actually, Justice Clarence Thomas stated it in very simplified terms. Commerce is shipping goods, not making goods. Just as a side note on federal regulation, above is a slide provided to us by Senator Mike Lee. Behold my display of the 2013 Federal Register. It contains over 80,000 pages of new rules, regulations, and notices, all written and passed by unelected bureaucrats. The small stack of papers on top of the display are the laws passed by elected members of Congress and signed into law by the President. You can see why the administrative state is considered the fourth branch of government. A suggested fix to this problem would be, of course, via an Article 5 Convention of States that would further define the Commerce Clause, such as the power of Congress under the Interstate Commerce Clause is restricted to the regulation of shipping and transportation across state lines. Congress has no authority to regulate any matter on the basis that it affects interstate commerce. Okay, from regulations, now let's move to dollars. Now let's look at the source of massive spending by our government, the General Welfare Clause, located in the Constitution under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 1. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Here we have literally the trillion-dollar question. Can Congress spend money on projects that go beyond the enumerated powers of Congress, or is Congress limited to spending for their enumerated powers listed in the Constitution? Well, you may ask, just what are enumerated powers? Enumerated powers are set forth in the Constitution, for example, borrowing powers, the ability to declare war, the establishment of armies, and providing a navy, and many more. So, what did the framers think? Well, James Madison's view of the General Welfare Clause was that spending should be limited to the enumerated powers of Congress. as he has stated, and I'm paraphrasing here from Federalist 41, with respect to the words general welfare, I have always regarded them as qualified by the detail of powers connected with them. To take them in a literal and unlimited sense would be a metamorphosis of the Constitution into a character which there is a host of proofs was not contemplated by its creators. Alexander Hamilton's view was similar to Madison, but went beyond enumerated powers, national interest, and where states had no jurisdiction. The stated view here of Alexander Hamilton is an interpretation by Justice Joseph Story, who served on the Supreme Court from 1811 to 1845. We will see Justice Story will play a significant upcoming role. But Hamilton's view was the General Welfare Clause was subject to two important limitations. First, expenditures should be for the national interest, not local or personal interest. Second, this clause was adopted solely for areas where the states possess no jurisdiction. Now, let's go back to FDR. Well, another component of FDR's New Deal was the Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933, which was legislation to create demand for agricultural products and therefore higher prices. Unbelievable, but here's how it was to work. A tax was imposed on processors of farm products. The tax proceeds then were paid to farmers for the purpose of reducing their crops. The intent was then to increase prices by decreasing the quantities produced. The Agricultural Adjustment Act was challenged in United States v. Butler, 1936. Butler was a processor of cotton and attacked the tax on the grounds that it was an integral part of an unconstitutional program to control agricultural production. The court held the Agricultural Adjustment Act as unconstitutional and ruled in favor of Butler. However, the court did reason in accordance with Justice Story's interpretation of Hamilton's view that Congress can tax and spend as long as it is for the national welfare and does not interfere with states' rights. This reasoning opened the door to uncontrolled spending that has led our country to a national debt of over $19 trillion. Well, a suggested fix to this problem, of course, via an Article 5 Convention of States, would be to further define the General Welfare Clause to correspond with the views of Madison and Hamilton, such that the power to spend money through the General Welfare Clause does not give Congress the ability to spend money on issues that were within the jurisdiction of states. In other words, adhere to the 10th Amendment, which states, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. In summary, we suggest that as part of an Article 5 Convention of States, for the purpose of amending the Constitution, that specific language should be written that clarifies and adjusts the Commerce Clause and General Welfare Clause to their original meanings, and that proper checks and balances be put in place to ensure the federal judiciary can no longer legislate from the bench. In closing, I would like to leave you with this quote. The founders gave us a legitimate path to save our liberty by using our own state governments to impose binding restraints on the federal government. It is time to dust off the tool the founders gave us in Article 5 and get started. Thank you.